Hello and welcome to my video all about how to do the I-cord cast on. This technique produces a narrow tube of stitches at the starting end of your knitting, and it's a very stable and neat way to start a knitting project. I have already cast on 3 stitches and I've used the long tail cast on method to do so. However, you can use your preferred method. The reason I've cast on 3 is because I want my I-cord to be 3 stitches wide. If you wanted an I-cord narrower or wider than this, then feel free to do so. For instance, if you wanted an I-cord 5 stitches wide instead, then you would cast on 5 stitches at this point. Any type of needles can be used to do this, but I'm using circular needles. The very first thing you need to do is transfer the cast on stitches to the other needle. If you are using double pointed or circular needles, you can simply slide the stitches to the other needle. Otherwise, the way to do it is to just slip those stitches from one needle to the other like so, taking the left hand needle into the front of each stitch and transferring each one so that they don't twist. And now we can begin the repeating section. This begins with a KFB, aka a knit front back. To do this, you do all the steps of a normal knit stitch, except you don't push the stitch off the end of the needle at the end. Instead, you swing the right hand needle around to the back and then knit into the back of the stitch. So you take the needle down through that top stitch and cross like so, and then complete the stitch just like you would a normal knit stitch. So you're essentially just knitting into the front and the back of the top stitch. This creates an extra stitch, so you now have 2 stitches on the right hand needle when you only started with 1 on the left hand needle. This creates an extra stitch, so you've now increased by 1 stitch overall. You're now going to do 2 regular knit stitches. You then end up with 4 stitches on the right hand needle. And now you're going to transfer 3 of those back to the left hand needle. So you take your left hand needle into the front of each of the stitches and just slip them back onto the left needle. So we've now increased by 1 stitch overall, and we have 3 stitches on the left and 1 on the right. And now we repeat all of those stages again, starting from the KFB. So we start knitting, and then before pushing the stitch off, we swing the right hand needle to the back, and then knit down into the back of the stitch as well. And then we do 2 regular knit stitches before sliding the last 3 stitches back onto the left hand needle. And then keep on repeating that sequence over and over until you have the desired number of stitches on your needles plus 2. For instance, I want to end up with 10 stitches on my needles, so I'm aiming for 12 stitches. One thing to bear in mind throughout this process is to keep the yarn nice and tight, especially on the KFBs. Because loose yarn would create a loose I-cord, you need the tightness in the yarn to pull the stitches into the I-cord tube shape. So just be aware of that throughout this project. Okay, so I'm just adding the 12th stitch now. So now I have 12 stitches on the right hand needle, and then I'm going to slip 3 stitches back onto the left hand needle as usual. At this point I'm going to do a K2 tog, i.e. knit 2 together. So I'm going to take my right hand needle up through the top 2 stitches and then knit those together to produce 1 stitch. I then do a regular knit stitch to give me 2 stitches on the right hand needle. I then slip both of these stitches back to the left hand needle and finish with another K2 tog. As you can see, I ended up with 10 stitches overall. I'm just going to do a few rows now, just to show you more clearly what the I-cord cast on looks like. And here we are, this is the finished result. As you can see, it doesn't have much stretch and it makes a very neat finish. One thing you might notice about the finished result is that the stitches next to the I-cord are quite elongated. So it looks like there's a little bit of a space between the I-cord and the stitching. This technique is the usual technique for doing an I-cord, and this is just how it looks. You either like the look or you don't. If you don't like it, then there is a different way of doing an I-cord cast on. This involves picking up the stitches directly on the I-cord, and I'll be doing a video about that sometime soon. Bear in mind though that the elongated stitches do look a bit pronounced in this example because I'm using super bulky yarn. If you were using a finer yarn, that gap would obviously be smaller and more subtle. So I encourage you to give it a go and see what you personally think of the finished result. I hope this video has been helpful to you, and thank you very much for watching.